Hello and welcome back to The Pisky Trap, a series where we explore the folklore, history and legends from across Devon and Cornwall. I hope you're all keeping well and you've had a good few weeks. We're now well into December and it feels like the year has flown by and the festive season is suddenly pretty much upon us. We've had a few bright and crisp days here in Cornwall this week, and it's been nice to see people's lights and Christmas decorations all going up. A big thank you to all of you who've been listening and supporting the podcast this year, to all the amazing patrons over on Patreon, and to all the lovely people who've come along to the live talks as well. On that note, if you missed my talk on Dark Tales of Cornish Smuggling, I'll be reviving that for a couple of dates in the new year. There will also be a brand new series of talks in the spring, which I'll let you know more about in the new year. Right, there's not much more news-wise at my end, only to say that this is going to be the penultimate episode of the year. The final episode of 2025 will be out on Christmas Eve, where I'll be telling some traditional local ghost stories. So stay tuned for that one. But for now, let's crack on with this episode. You guys will be well aware by now that I'm big on finding local folk tales and looking into storytelling traditions here in Cornwall and Devon. So I was excited when, in April of this year, a new book was published entitled Cornish Folk Tales of Place, Traditional Stories from Mid and West Cornwall. The book is written by Anna Chorlton, who's been a guest on the podcast before, where we chatted about Cornish piskies. And I'd loved her earlier book on Cornish folk tales of place, which had explored tales from North and East Cornwall. I'm always drawn to tales that are linked with particular places and sites and locations in and around Cornwall. So I had to get myself a copy of this latest book, which I really enjoyed reading and I highly recommend. Instantly, I knew that I wanted to get back in touch with Anna, who is a Cornish writer and storyteller with the brilliant company Mazed Tales, to see if she might be up for chatting about the book. So a couple of weeks back, I dropped Anna an email, and a few days later, we sat down for a chat. So in this episode, you'll be hearing from our conversation as we discuss the book, how that project came together, delve into some of the stories, and discuss some of the themes that crop up as well. So, without further ado, here's our next episode, Traditional Stories from Mid and West Cornwall, with Anna Chorlton. The sea was rough, and the wind high when Bucka Widden came ashore. Tall, with hair coiled high with bladder rack, skin leathery as conger eels, Bucka heaved himself from the sea. His deep blue tail turned to legs for a tide, and he walked up the beach to Newlyn. An extract there from one of the stories in Anna Chorlton's book. And this particular story reminded me of something that our old friend, and pretty much regular podcast guest at this point, once wrote back in the 19th century. He talked of how the people in Mousehole had a nickname for their neighbours living in Newlyn. They called them Buckers. And it seems to be connected with this old tradition of Newlyn fishermen leaving a portion of their catch to appease Bucka, the spirits. Some writers have even theorised that Bucka was once thought of and revered as a sort of deity. Bucka is one of the many brilliant little stories that feature in Anna's book, And what's lovely is that we're taken on a journey from place to place with wonderful descriptions that really set the scene before you delve into tales from that particular area. I wanted to know more about how the book came about, the process, and to chat about some of these stories. So, a couple of weeks back, I sat down to chat with Anna and dove straight into talking about the book and how for me it conjured up memories from my childhood.
I really enjoyed reading it because I think I realised that although there were some stories in there that I was already familiar with, there were lots that I think I remember hearing as a child that I'd forgotten. There was one of my first books that I got in relation to this. I was probably about 9 years old, something. It was called The Magic Ointment and Other Stories, but it had some of the classic stories, especially from West Cornwall, in there. So some of these were sort of jogging my memory, and I was like, I don't know that I've heard some of these stories, that it's kind of taken me back to 30 years ago. But in amongst those, there were some that I hadn't heard before, which is always exciting to me as well, because as someone delving into this sort of stuff, you're always looking to find these little gems and these little stories that you haven't encountered, but sometimes they have similar themes or they cross over with other things you've encountered elsewhere.
Yeah, I love it when there's a tale that you haven't heard before, or that someone hasn't heard before, because quite often with the West Cornwall tales, they have been heard before, like the Mermaid of Zena, everyone's heard of, but there are tales in there that people haven't heard, and that's really great to discover, and I hadn't heard before either. So that's part of the adventure, is discovering new stories and or building new stories around a fragment.
And do you enjoy the kind of, I guess, the research process of kind of delving and finding these different stories and kind of putting those together and bringing those together?
Yeah, I enjoy reading lots of different versions of the tales. I'm not so good at bringing them all together. So Sue works with me on the research. So I read all the books, but she works with me on she worked with me on this book on grouping the tales. So this is Sue Field from Mazed, and into places. So I began with this one researching and reading Sarah Ennis and the Drolls and the Cornish Drolls. And I rewrote quite a few of the tales from there and read her versions of West Cornwall tales and tales of West Penwith and Bottrell's. And it took me such a long time that I was going very slowly round the coast. And we were also doing a podcast for kids, the Cornish Tales for Kids. And this next school up was Hale, and I hadn't got there. And the children learn the stories, and they're told the stories and they learn the stories. And then they were telling the stories on the podcast. And I hadn't rewritten any of the tales yet. So Sue worked with me. She collected the tales, started to collect the tales ahead of me. So we worked together, researching and collecting.
Nice. So it's kind of because they're sort of grouped together, kind of, I suppose, geographically is kind of how you've sort of laid them out. And I guess one of the things I also love is the descriptive nature of the way that you've kind of brought things together so that they flow. So there's that sense of visiting the place where these stories are. I imagine that was quite a process, because were you actively kind of going out and sort of, was some of it from memory and some of it actively going out to the locations to sort of think about where these stories are set in a way?
Yeah, so all of the places or nearly all of the places I visited whilst writing the book. It started with a camping trip to St Buryan, and it was a very wet camping trip. And we spent quite a lot of time sitting on camping chairs inside the tent. And my daughter and the children didn't care. They were having a great time. And so we went on lots of very wet walks around West Pentwith, around St Buryan and Lamorna and the Merry Maidens, and lots of different villages along the coast. And so that was the first story adventure that we went on. And then from that place writing I got really into writing the tales of West Penwith because that's where I'd been. And then it got a bit more, we went on day trips, but I wanted to go on a big trip and stay down there for a long time, but I didn't really have the funds, so it became little trips. So I went on a one night stay to St Ives, and from there I visited Zena and along the coast there, and there was lots of day trips down the A30 to different places because I suddenly needed to go to the place because I wanted to write the tale. And and I'm not a very confident traveller, although somehow I was writing what turned out to be quite a travel book. And I don't like driving on the big roads, so we went as a family together, and so I was always waiting to write the next bit until we could go on the adventure. And we also went to stay at Helston for about 5 days, and you can see reading the book that I'd really spent some time there. And I loved going to all the places on the Lizard. I really enjoyed that adventure. And my favourite was Croft Pascoe Pool. I found that a really magical place. And but then my daughter broke her finger, so we had to go home. So there was a lot of incidents during the adventuring.
Amazing. Yeah, it's one place that I feel like I never get down to enough is the area around the Lizard. But there's so many places that I've kind of been to bits and parts of it, but there's some places that I haven't been in years and years that I kind of go, it's always on my list to kind of go back and explore. But did you find that process of actively, in terms of the process, is it a thing of like once you've visited a place, do you kind of then as soon as possible feel like the need to write while it's still fresh, if you like, or how does that kind of then translate to when you kind of put things to paper, if you like?
I do the place writing when I'm there. I'll make lots of notes, write poems, write about the place. But then writing the tale, if I write the tale very quickly afterwards. So when I was staying near Helston and writing about the Lizard, my family were going off to do other things, and I sat and wrote for 2 days the tales that I wanted to write from the places that I've been. And so when you're really there and writing, that works really well because you can really feed all the place writing into the tale and really make it the tale of place.
Definitely. I think that soaks in nicely, doesn't it? I think, and that's one thing I enjoy about it is there is a sense of a geographical sense of where these stories are set, and I really enjoy that because you feel like you're going on in my head, the kind of the way that it's set, it feels like you're going on a journey around a certain route around Cornwall as you're following the stories, and then you're kind of arriving at the next town or village and that kind of thing. It's quite a nice way that those things flow.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that I had a very clear idea of where I wanted to go, and so that's really nice that comes across, that it's a journey, because yeah, it really was a journey and an adventure, and finding the tales that fitted with the places that I was going. So yeah.
And I think it's nice that you kind of break it up with between each sort of section and each location. You've kind of got these elements that I'm guessing are personal experiences that give you a sense of it feels very personalized as you're sort of going on this journey as a reader. It feels like you are then soaking up the atmosphere of this particular location.
Yeah, so it was personal to me. I mean, I had quite a few interesting mystical experiences, or a few, as I was going along. So one of them was at St Senara Church in Zena, and I went to find the mermaid's pew, and it wasn't there because it had been taken away for restoration. And I was sitting somewhere else and just thinking and writing. and lots of little birds started singing in the eaves, and it felt to me like it was the mermaid song. So that was one of my experiences as I was going around, magical experiences. And also we went to there was also another trip where my son lives halfway to West Cornwall, and we kept turning up and camping in his garden, much to his great delight, so that we could drive down. So we went to Figgy Dowdy's Well when we were camping, and it's up a little lane by a mine, and then down this very overgrown path that we only just managed to find. And there's a tree growing over the well. And I got really drawn into the waters, very strange, murky, swirly waters. And I was almost mesmerized by them. And I felt really uneasy and uncomfortable. And then I banged my head on the tree and it all went away. And that, I mean, I don't know what I was experiencing, but that was another very strange experience with a folklore place that I found. So I had a couple of adventures. And then when we went to find Ralph's Cupboard, which is at Portreath, we walked along the cliff and as a family. And because a lot of the story adventuring and place writing is about us going as a family. It said in a big sign, keep your children and animals close by. And so as we walked along, the cliff got closer and closer to the edge of the path, and the path was very much the cliff edge. And I was very worried about my daughter falling off. And so we went to sit on some scrubland with some wild ponies and look at them. And my husband went to the edge and took a picture of the giant Rath's Zorn, the Ralph's Cupboard. And that was one of the places I didn't actually see because I wasn't brave enough to go to the edge because I didn't want my daughter to fall off, or I didn't want myself to fall off. So there were lots of little, adventures like that. And then when we went back down, I was brave enough to tell my family the story of the giant Rath. So I also told them the tales as we went around as well.
It's one of my favourites, the idea of that sort of giant round Portreath and Rath. I think it's because, being a sort of small child and being told stories about giants, you do visualize these sort of big giants coming out of caves to kind of pluck up ships and things like that. So it's one of those places in the landscape that you can see just lends itself to stories about things like giants. And I seem to remember Bottrell sort of saying the sailors didn't like going in there. And it's partly because of the tides as well, because it's just they can sort of sweep you in towards this gaping cupboard, I think he calls it, or something like that, which ties into the name. But it's one of those places that I've yet to visit myself as well. But I imagine it's probably amazing to see, either if you've got a drone or if you can get out on a boat and sort of look towards the cave from the sea side, if that makes sense.
Yes, it was definitely the kind of place that you wouldn't want to abseil off unless you were really enthusiastic.
I don't know, maybe if there was a group of us, maybe I'd be kind of peer pressured into doing it or something. But otherwise, yeah, it doesn't overly appeal in the same way. Much as I like swimming in the sea, I don't know. I think I'd be worried about the tides and stuff in those places.
And that's why maybe there was the legend of the giant Rath there. I think it might have been also to do with smuggling, because those kind of stories cover up what was going on and why they didn't want people to go there. So it might be a one of the smuggling ones, but also it might just be that it was a terrifying place to go, as you say, where boats would be wrecked, and so it was a warning not to go there because your boat would be wrecked. But
I wonder if there's that sort of, if you subscribe to the idea of a sort of folk remembrance, if you like, there's been loads of disasters in that area, loads of ships that have had trouble there. We don't go near that cave, and there's also this local story of the giant as well, and all these things kind of come together. Were there when you were kind of sourcing these different tales and kind of going through the sort of I suppose the research process, Were there particular stories that you kind of always felt like you always are drawn to, if you like?
Yeah, so when Sue and I were working together on it, so she was finding really quite a huge amount more tales connected to the places than would fit in a book. There are so many folk tales of Cornwall. And so then I would read them all, and yeah, I'm very clearly drawn to particular tales that I want to tell. So it was never a problem picking out which ones I wanted to tell. And I really like the most I like just when a very fragment of a tale, like the giant wrath, actually, that then I can build a whole story around. I like to build around a fragment of a tale. And so if I'm retelling Bottrell's tales, I find that more difficult because they're already there, and you have to tell it in your own way. Whereas if there's only a fragment of a tale, I'm drawn to that because I like to reimagine it in the place.
And that's one thing I really liked about the book is there are some that are, say, they're tales from that are from Bottrell, they hunt, and there's sort of a pre-existing sort of story arc there. But I like, for example, that the Wrath story. I really like that sense of in the story you tell. There's this sort of relationship between Wrath the giant and the sort of local people around Portreath, and how he's kind of how there's that sort of conflict between the giant and who's kind of causing everyone trouble, basically.
Yeah, and I think that is a theme with the Giants of West Cornwall, is that they are part of the community and they're relating to the people around them. Sometimes in like the giant of Castle Treen, he's a friendly giant and he wants to be friends and he wants to help his community, and he builds a fortress around the farm to protect the people, and he wants to get the pirates and stop them from upsetting the people, but then he has a bit of an unfortunate game with them in the end. But he's essentially he is a friendly giant. And then there's Wrath, who interacts with the fisher folk, but not in such a friendly way. He wants to eat them all, basically, but that's his way of interacting with them. But yeah, so that is something about the giants, is that they are part of the community, even though they're so big. And the giant Rill, who's not in the story, he's very involved in, he wants to build a bridge to France to help his community get to France. And there's lots of giant, obviously the Bolster is a huge pageant there, isn't there, every year, and he's really part of the community even today, and a great figure in the community.
Yeah, it's fascinating ways like communities taking ownership of these giants in a way as well. I find that really fascinating. You know, you've now got the sort of the representation and the involvement of Bolster, even though it's kind of it's an interesting one in that story where he's kind of St. Agnes kind of tricks him, and you've got the whole sort of, you know, the bloodletting and that kind of thing. But you get the sense that it's a tricky one because he sort of falls in between. Is he a troublesome giant, or is he just not the smartest of giants?
Yeah, I think he's not the smartest, also because he's a bit of a he's not very good with women either. He's not a very nice to women, and he's a bit of a lech. I think that's his problem, and so that gets the better of him in the end, obviously, with St. Agnes, and then finds a way to get the better of him. But that's his weakness is women and Bolster. So yeah, so he might be a nice giant, but he that's why he gets his comeuppance.
Yeah, some of these are very much about a giant being a kind of the punishment of the giant in some way or another. And then there's one I remember, which is the talking about this sort of friendly giant, but it goes wrong. Is I think at the giant of Carn Galva, where he's a friendly giant, but he has the boy who's a friend, but then he's
Right.
kind of playing too rough and the boy dies. And again, it's a sort of he's not it's not like he's seeking out to do harm. It's just because he's not the smartest of giants, he doesn't realize his own force. It's
Yeah,
very
so that's
weird
the
thing to
same story as the Castle Train giant. Yeah, so because the giants love to play rock throwing contests, but they don't know that, and so it's fine if they're playing with each other, but if someone else gets in the way or gets involved in the game, it doesn't go quite as they'd planned. So
Yeah, and it's a thing that seems to crop up where we've got either it's often they have a friend or something like that, and the giant either decides to pat the friend on the head or give them a hug or something, and it goes horribly wrong because they don't realize that they're, 10 times the size and the strength. But
I
then you've got
can't help being on the side of the giants. I do like the giants, and I love writing the giant stories as well. And so I'm on the side of the giant who's just, thrown a rock on someone's head, but I shouldn't be really.
I think you can't help but picture them because, especially certain areas of the Cornish landscape, you've got these stones in sometimes the strangest of places, it seems. It's not difficult to imagine that people would be like, why is that rock formation there? Why is that the landscape this way? And it's easy to jump to this and have this idea that, it's giants competing with one another. It's kind of easy to visualize that especially when you're in certain places in the Cornish landscape because it's right there to see.
Yeah, so near where I live, there's Tretheavy Coit, which is known as the Giant's House, and I went there today, and it has upright stones, and then this huge capstone, which could only have been put there by a giant. It is the weight of it is incredible, must be incredible, and so the giant that's known locally as the Giant's House, and then near me as well is Cheese Ring that was, some say was made by weathering, but others of us know that it was formed by a giant throwing contest with Tiny St. Chu, who challenged Uther, the leader of the giants, to a giant throwing contest.
It's a much more interesting story, isn't it, than weathering.
Yeah.
What I found really fascinating is there are a number of particular themes that I noticed in a lot of the stories that you cover in the book. And ones that crops up quite a bit that I found really interesting, and I'm always drawn to this idea, is Pisky-related stories, and a lot of them around the Pisky site idea. That theme sort of seems to crop up quite a lot. There's especially a lot of stories, not just in West Cornwall, but you do seem to get a lot of, like a large concentration of them, where you've got an individual, say the magic ointment is a good example, where you've got the woman who goes to her friend's house and there's the ointment she rubs on her eye, and that gives her the Pisky sight in one eye. I always find that really interesting because it's one that seems to crop up all over Cornwall, really, where you've got this idea of bath water sometimes, or it's an ointment or something, or finding a four-leaf clover sometimes, where you're suddenly gifted the Pisky sight, and it feels like that can work really, really well, or it can work, it can go horribly wrong.
Yeah, so the main thing about the Piskies is they're invisible, but yeah, so they've got to be ways in which they can be seen, so that they can be part of the story, and so there's the tale of the magic ointment. She puts her finger in the pestle and mortar, and then she rubs it on her eye, and she's really embarrassed because her friend is bringing her tea and cake, but she can't tell her that she can see Piskies and Spriggans and bringing her friend all these flowers and herbs to make her potions, and her friend is pretending that she's a very ordinary lady and she's just bringing tea and buns, but actually she's not an ordinary lady, and and she doesn't realize that her friend has the Pisky sight. So that is I really like that tale. And then I think as you've said in a previous podcast about the midwife's tale, where the midwife is doing her job, and she hasn't been at all, she hasn't noticed or minded that the person employing her to birth their child is very, very small, and she hasn't really made anything of this at all. But then she gets the soap in her eyes and she can see all the piskies everywhere. And that, as I think, is what you mean by when it doesn't go well, because later on the piskie finds out that she can see him, and he punches her in the eye and she loses her sight. And so that is but then there's another tale that Carnegiac, I think it's called, of where the girl goes away to live with the piskie master, and that is a bit. I'm a bit uneasy with that tale, because you shouldn't really just ride off with someone, and I was unsure about whether to put that in the book, but it is a folk tale. So she rides off with him and lives with him in the piskie land and cares for a boy, and she's not allowed to touch the ointment. And eventually she after a couple of years of being there, she realizes everything's a bit odd, and she decides she will try, and she puts the ointment in her eye, and so she can see the piskie feast going on all about her that she couldn't see before. But that does end well, because she lets on, or he finds out that she has the piskie sight, and although he takes her straight home and she can't live there anymore, she can't do her job anymore looking after the boy, he gives her the money and address to go to Morva Fair. So it ends up really well for her, even though she has revealed that she's seen the piskie.
I know what you mean, because the beginning of it's sort of a little bit unclear on what are Bob of the Khan's motives and things like that, but it kind of pans out. It pans out well in the end, and I thought it was a really interesting one, because I find Khan Kenedjek such a fascinating feature in the landscape, and I've sort of come across other sort of ghost stories and things like that, but I hadn't heard that particular piskie story before, so that was a really local one that I'd not encountered before. But similarly, I hadn't encountered the fairy cow before either, which kind of feeds into the idea of sort of, as I understand it, piskies kind of stealing milk from cows, essentially.
Yeah, so they must do this a lot because of all the milk and cream, clotted cream in Cornwall. So it's supposed to, all the best ones are supposed to be made by the piskies. And so in that one is a four-leaf clover that she sees the piskies. And there are quite a few stories in tales in which the piskie site is found with the four-leaf clover. And there's one on Bodmin Moor as well. There's quite a few.
I feel like I remember, do you know Henry Jenner? I feel like I remember finding a quote by him sort of saying that he remembered when he was a young boy, his nurse talking about putting I think a four-leaf clover in amongst the wisp of straw she carried on her head or her hat when she was carrying milk. And the idea was that so she could keep an eye on where the piskies were. But there was also apparently this ritual of some people would put a line of salt around their cows to try and keep the piskies away. But the downside of that is that you might anger them and you might end up getting piskie led. There's definitely some beliefs that seem to have existed at one point around the milk might turn sour or things around that in terms of the piskies and their cattle.
Yeah, so the farmers know to leave the piskies alone and to be very, very careful where the piskies are about.
I wonder if that also feeds into, you hear about people leaving out offerings of bowls of milk and things, whether it's a kind of, if we do that we're at least giving them some milk so they won't trouble our livestock or something like that, whether there's a kind of, we're trying to compromise here or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, I love those, but also there was one that I particularly liked was the little cake bird. That story, I don't know why that one stuck with me, because I find it quite unusual when it comes to sort of, it's a bit different, I think, when it comes to sort of piskie related stories, and there's that sense of piskies kind of entering your dreams in a way, which I hadn't really considered before.
Yeah, so that's a story from Ennis Tregarthen. It's really magical tale, and I love the tales where it's a grandparent and a child and the piskies. And quite often in her tales, it's the grandparent and the child and the piskies. and the piskies come and sit on the little girl's nose, and she dreams of the piskies. She dreams of the thing she's wished for, which is a little cake bird.
I think I love it because there's a sense of something real about it, and that her granny sort of says there's not a lot of money this year to be able to kind of make a Christmas cake or something like that, but she dreams of having the cake, and it's sort of like because she's asked the Piskies for it, she gets to have it in her dreams. There's a realism to that, and you can imagine sort of Victorian children sort of wishing for Christmas cake, and this belief around the Piskies kind of feeding into that in a way. There's something that that really stuck out to me.
Yeah, and I suppose when you have nothing at all, like they did, you do dream of things, and you just want things, and you hope for things, and then you kind of get over it eventually after a very long time, because you know you can't have it, and you but in she actually does get to have it in a way, doesn't she? She gets to have her Christmas through the Pisky dreams. So, yeah, and so it is really magical tale.
And one also felt very almost fairy tale like in a way was the sort of Pisky Shoemaker, which kind of seems to blend a few of the different themes that you get, because you've got this idea that she can hear the sort of hammering away of this sort of little cobbler or sort of Pisky Shoemaker, but can't see him for ages. Then when she does see him, it's this sort of making shoes for is it the sort of fairy king or fairy queen?
Yeah, so he was making the shoes for the fairy queen, the one that or the Pisky king will choose, and
Yes.
he'll choose the one who has the shoes that he likes the most. And so they're all making, they're all asking the Pisky shoemaker to make them shoes. And so he's hammering and hammering and hammering, and that's what the little girl can hear. And eventually, at the end, she gets to go and see the king choose the shoes and he chooses the silver shoes that the Pisky shoemaker has made. And because the king chooses these shoes and this Pisky, the Pisky shoemaker gets to become the king's shoemaker. So the little girl gets to go on the whole journey with the Pisky shoemaker through her Pisky sight.
What I really like about it is you've got sort of as I said, you've got sort of several things in there. You've got the idea of the finding the four-leaf clover and sort of seeing the Pisky and seeing the work happening. Then you've got the idea of like Piskies doing work, which is kind of another sort of theme. They're often doing work or doing tasks for people. But then you've also got the sort of teleportation bit there, where she's kind of taken to see this sort of almost parade and this sort of ritual with the shoes and everything like that, and the sort of fairyland, if you want to call it, or Pisky land, if you like, Pisky realm. And so you've kind of got, it's rare that you get a story where you've kind of got several multiple themes within one.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that at all. Yeah, that is quite a complex story as well. Yeah, because in the Pisky in the cellar, he teleports, doesn't he? So that's similar to that one, but he doesn't see them doing lots of work or anything. They're all having a great time in a party, aren't they, in that one? So yeah, so this one she learns the shoemaker's trade, doesn't she, by watching him?
Yeah, it's something like a variation of when it comes to work, it's often a variation of the sort of Pisky thresher theme, where it's sort of a farmer discovers a Pisky doing work for them, and then
but also that one is a very much a place story, because it's on the downs with the bees, and she goes to the downs each summer with her granny, who's or her mother actually, who's taking the bees to the downs to find the clover, and so that and the heather. So that is a really it's a really magical place to go and visit as well, and you can feel the Pisky magic around you. You could imagine going on, transporting to fairyland from there. Yeah.
And sort of with that in mind, there's the sort of, is it the Lost Boy of St. Alan?
Yeah.
That also is kind of connected with a sort of visiting or encountering a sort of Pisky realm or Pisky dances. And there's that idea that time passes differently. I'm always intrigued by that as well, that you can kind of get swept up in sort of Pisky world for a certain amount of time, but whilst you're there, it might seem like it's an hour or something, but you might have been gone for days. I always find that idea really fascinating as well.
Yeah, so that happens in quite a few tales. And everybody's looking for the lost boy of St. Alan. His granny, his granddad, his mum and his dad, and the whole village are looking for him. But he doesn't know because he's just watching the Piskies. And does he join in the dance? He's with them and in their land, and he's having his own adventure. And it's only been an hour. But so when he comes back, he's puzzled as to why everybody's so worried about him. And time is different. So that's one of the magical gifts of the Piskies is time and time shifting and time traveling, like the fact that they're invisible and the Pisky sight.
Hope you're enjoying the episode. If you are, then don't forget to give us a like and subscribe. Maybe consider leaving a review, which can help other people to discover the series and also helps this project to grow. If you'd like to help support the series further, then please consider checking out my Patreon page at patreon.com/The Pisky Trap. This project is completely independent and it's funded by myself, along with the help of listener support. From as little as £1 a month, pledges on Patreon help me to cover the running costs and purchase books, materials, and gain access to historical archives as part of the research for each episode. So if you can help by offering a monthly pledge on Patreon, that'd be amazing. If not, no worries. Just continuing to spread the word among friends and on social media is also a real help. Okay then, that's enough of that. Let's get back to the episode.
There's another thing that I hadn't really looked into before. I don't think at all across the podcast yet, but it's a thing that I noticed crops up quite a lot, and that is the devil in a few different stories. That we kind of get the devil appearing in different scenarios, and there's often a different kind of theme, or sometimes you feel like there's a different something we're supposed to take away from this story. Like there's the one with again, it's a shoemaker or a cobbler and the devil who kind of turns up wanting a pair of boots or wanting a pair of shoes.
Yes, the cobbler. So the devil has a different character in lots of the different tales. So sometimes he's dashing, like when he comes to knit for Duffy, and he's very charming in that one. And then in other ones he's really sinister, and like for the cobbler, and for the wrestler, he comes to challenge a wrestling contest in Laddock, and he's really quite spooky the way he manipulates the wrestler into giving him his money and entering this contest. And he can be all different things in this story, lots of different like characters in different folk tales across Cornwall, which I find really interesting. But always in lots and lots of the tales, at the end he's thwarted by a priest for some reason, and in lots of the tales he disappears in a billow of smoke with his cloak all about him, and and lightning and a storm is created as he disappears because he's lost to the priests. So that's something that is repeated in quite a few of the tales, is the smelly billowing cloak that he disappears in.
And I found that the wrestling one really interesting, because you've got the relationship with the sort of the local reverend there as well, where he's sort of, the wrestler has been given these, is it 5 gold pieces by the devil, kind of going, I'll give you these 5 gold pieces and I challenge you to this basically wrestling contest.
Yeah.
But the priest kind of going, oh no, you've kind of been tricked by the devil, and sort of gives him this piece of parchment that's in his jacket. And obviously the implication is this, maybe this is a passage from the Bible or something like that, and that is mean that the devil, when he tries to throw this wrestler, is kind of ineffective. So you've got this, there's clearly a sort of something to be taken from this sort of the power of the parish priest, who then is sort of saying, I was banishing some of these spirits while you were wrestling as well. So it almost kind of ties into that idea of the conjuring parson sort of idea, where you've got the sort of ghost layer element and the power of sort of local parsons a little bit too.
Yeah, so he's like the exorcist of the devil kind of thing.
Well, yeah, because it sort of says that he doesn't he, if I'm remembering right, he says something about while you were wrestling, I was fighting and keeping the spirits away.
Yeah, so they have a kind of war, an unseen war between the devil and the parson, and the prayers and and yeah, they are having a wrestle themselves, a spiritual wrestle. And somehow the parson wins through this, because the parchment is in the wrestler's pocket of his waistcoat or something, and it protects him. And so it seemed like such an unassuming tale, and then as you say, as you look into it and unpick it, there's loads to it, isn't there? So it's really, yeah.
And it's nice to see Cornish wrestling featuring within a folktale as well.
Yeah, that was exciting to find that.
There's one that also really stood out to me because it's quite local to me, and that was the sort of the giant's hat story, where you've kind of got the devil playing the trick on this saint with the sort of using the elements against him, but also the stone that kind of appears at the end of the story, where his staff and his hat. But I think that stone is sort of, I think it might be up the road from me near Penrice. I feel like it's
Is it at the school?
at Penn. Yeah, I feel like it's on the
Penrice
grounds that the
School.
school are.
So
I'll have to double check.
I went to look for St Austell Down, and it's been built on.
Yeah.
Where the story is set has been built on, but the stone is in the school. But when I went to look for it, unfortunately, it was locked. There must be another way that you can go and see the stone, but for some reason I couldn't find a way in. So, but it is something that a stone that you can go and see.
Yeah, but it's another sort of fascinating, and it's, you sort of mentioned at the end there that it was kind of, was it moved by soldiers in 1798?
Yeah, soldiers moved it. Yeah, so that's why it's still there. Yeah, but that in that story, the devil's much more like a fun trickster character or conjurer character. He's playing a game with the priest or the saint, and there's lots of wind and turbulence on the moor, and he's like throwing his hat up and throwing his sword up, and he's teasing him, and there's this whole game that goes on, that the devil is having a lot of fun. And so he's not a sinister devil in this one, although he turns things to stone. He doesn't actually turn the little saint to stone, or the little priest to stone. He runs away home, doesn't he? So he doesn't get turned to stone, but for some reason his hat does. So that in that one he is again it's a different character of a devil again.
Yeah, with the Duffy and the Devil, which is a kind of Cornish classic, really. It's a sort of Rumpelstiltskin type affair, isn't it? But it's it's a very famous story. Was that one that you kind of enjoyed sort of retelling in a way?
Yeah, I did really enjoy telling that. But again, it's a tale that is well known and is very much all there. So that one I actually found more challenging to do, because because I had to think of how to write it more in a little bit in my own way. So mainly I've stayed true to the original with that one, but I've changed the ending a little bit, I think. Yeah, so I did enjoy telling that one, because it's quite a fun one to tell. But it is the ones, although I did really enjoy telling the Mermaid of Zena, although that's very well known. And with Duffy, it was tricky to get a hold on that, I think.
I think one of my favorite parts of the story that always stands out to me is the sort of Squire Lovell kind of going out on this sort of hunt. And we've kind of talked about this the other day about the sort of the hare pursuit. And that kind of feeds in a little bit where you've got the squire trying to find the hare, and this leads him to this group of witches. And this is where he sees the devil kind of with this group of witches singing the song and kind of dancing and that kind of thing. So you've kind of got a sort of crossover there with it sort of being the witch themes that creep into it as well. I find really interesting.
Yeah, so the hare, Duffy's like a mentor really becomes a hare to go and find out what's going on. And in West Cornwall, the witches do shapeshift into hares. That's a big theme that I found, which I found really interesting, because in East Cornwall, although you have found differently recently, in East Cornwall, I found in the tales that the witches shapeshift into toads. And so I'd found quite a few shapeshifting into toad stories. And then in West Cornwall, they were all hares, and there's little elements of hares creep into quite a few of the tales.
Yeah, because I'm already thinking about the Witch of Carow. That kind of arc that we get of the idea of the sort of the alleged witch who can sort of transform into the shape of the hare. But you've kind of got the theme of the hunter who can never quite catch the hare, and that sort of pursuit theme, and them sort of being found in their human form later.
Yeah, so the hunter gets more and more frustrated, because he can't catch the hare, and his hounds run and run and run after the hare, but they're thwarted by the mud or the rain, and each time the hare goes through a pipe. So the shape-shifting of the hare is often to get through a tunnel or a pipe, or to be on unobserved, small enough to be on unobserved. And so the hare goes through the pipe under to the cottage. But Roe does manage to shoot the hare, and he does manage to get the hare, spoiling the story, sorry. But she's still alive. She's still fine. But she has been shot.
One thing I like that you have at the end of the story that you tell here is that at the end, the hunter, although he sort of finds her in human form, is worried that he might now become ill-wished. He's kind of fearful of the witch's power at the end, which I find an interesting little twist at the end.
Yeah, because he is going to be ill-wished. Because he's made a very big mistake there, because you don't mess with the witches. Yeah, he definitely has made a mistake that he wouldn't normally have made had he known that he was chased. But he should have known that it could have been a witch that he was shooting at.
There was definitely something up with that hair for sure. So yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that leads me into because witches is another theme, and I find the sort of witches of West Cornwall are really intriguing. And there's one that stands out, which I haven't really looked at much before, and it's quite a well-known story. It's the Maggie Figgy story, which is again kind of connected with a sort of landscape feature where you've got the chair ladder. Is it the chair ladder? I think it's called.
Yeah, the chair ladder. Yeah. So that's where her throne was, on the cliffs, where she could look out over and survey the seas. And she was a wielder of storms and wind. She had a wielder of the elements, so she can conjure a storm and make the seas into huge waves from her chair on the chair ladder. That she had lots of witches all about her as well, who flew on the witches of West Cornwall flew on ragworts. So they flew on their ragwort brooms, and so she is a weather witch.
And I like the fact that you've got this sort of theme that comes in of it kind of becomes quite dark because you've got this theme of basically wrecking going on there as well, of kind of using the elements to your advantage and sort of luring, in the same way you get stories about giants and caves sort of luring ships in. You've got the idea of sort of Magi Figgy on this giant stone chair, you know, conjuring up the storms to lure, is it, I can't remember if it's a Portuguese ship in this case or whatever it was.
So she is a wrecker witch, and she wrecks a ship, and it is macabre, you know, all the bodies come in on the shore, and all the witches bury the bodies in the sands, and then it's almost like a ghostly light keeps. She has taken all the treasure into her hut in a big chest, and a ghostly light keeps coming up the cliff to the chest, and she kind of learns to change herself during this tale, because she has been ruthless in her wrecking, but one of the relatives comes for the necklace, and she's forgiving, and she I think she changes her tune a bit during this story. And I think in a lot of the tales, the especially smuggler tales, ghost tales, and this wrecker tale, takes place on land, and the character in the tale learns something about how they should maybe be a bit kinder.
Otherwise, you might have expected that it could have gone another way, that she somehow gets some kind of comeuppance for the bad things that she has done. So it's interesting that rather than it being an outside, someone punishes Maggie, she kind of actively makes the decision to change, if that makes sense. On the other side of that, you kind of get witches that crop up in, I'm thinking of stuff like, is it Naturally Tranowth, when you've got Betty, who kind of is working more like a charmer to kind of offer some help in the form of either kind of divination of trying to find out where her lover is and things like that. So you've kind of got the witches that appear that are kind of either shape-shifting or are doing something that is kind of nefarious, but then you've also got some that are offering charming healing side that kind of crop up in some of the stories as well.
Yeah, so there's lots of healing witches in Cornish folklore, and like we were talking about the magic ointment, the witch there is a healing one, and also Betsy Laundry, who keeps the witch toads under the slates in her house in North Hill near Launceston, and I imagine her to be a healing witch, because she talks about the rhyme of the out net or in dock. That's a healing charm.
And it's interesting that toads sometimes crop up too. We've kind of talked about hares, and up the road from me in the village where I live in Towdreth, there's stories about a woman who is a suspected witch called Ginny Broad, and the local kids were told at one point, don't go near Ginny Broad's house because she keeps toads as pets. And it was the idea of having toads as familiars.
Right. Some of the Aunt Antsy in that story, she turns into a toad, but she's definitely not a healing witch. She's more of an ill-wishing witch.
And there's another topic that I thought of around the idea of ghosts, but they seem to be connected with, as is kind of understandable, I suppose, sort of loss at sea. The story of is it the phantom ship, where the chap meets this figure on a dark night and then kind of he rows out at night.
I mixed this two tales. So there's one of the man who sails out at night and gets lost, and there's the other one of the tale of Jack Harry's lights, which is the lights that can be seen over the bay at St Ives, and Jack Harry's the first person to have seen these lights. But I told the tale of the ghostly seaman and he meets him on the quay because he's insomniac and he can't sleep, and he goes down to the quay to walk, and he meets the ghost who joins him on his journey to this ship that he can see, and they have an adventure together. But there's another tale as well of two friends, and one of them has been shipwrecked, and he comes to find his friend, and he wants to tell his friend something, and they sit at the pub at Zena, and they eventually they find a way to communicate without one of them being very scared of the other. And so I think they're very similar stories of the ghostly seaman who comes and makes friends with somebody who's ashore.
I really like the idea of the sort of ghostly friend reappearing, and it sort of taps into that idea of sort of unfinished business, because is it something about a chest of stuff that he's saved up over his life that he wants his friend to have or something?
Yeah, so he's left his chest in Plymouth. He persuades his friend to go to this inn in Plymouth and find the chest, and he has to convince the landlady that the chest is his. And when he opens the chest, he finds the uniform of his friend inside, which he finds really moving and upsetting. But because the landlady can see the upset on his face, I think she then knows that it must be his.
I suppose I find those stories really poignant because you can imagine fishing communities in sort of West Penwith and in West Cornwall that they must have suffered losses and things that people lost at sea. These stories kind of make sense. It's sort of like communities' ways of coping with those sort of things through storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely, and also the comfort of a friend coming back and a friend being able to make peace with them and talk through their problems with them. And in one of the stories, The Smugglers of Penrose, the son who they think is drowned at sea comes back to the family, and it's unclear whether he's a ghost or not, but he has come back, and he's come back to his family home. So that there is some, as you say, that's really interesting. But then in The Spectre's Bride, the bridegroom comes home, but unfortunately he isn't a welcome homecoming. He's come back as a terrifying spectre, and all does not go greatly. Spoiler.
And what kind of continues to sort of motivate and drive you? What sort of stories do you find yourself drawn to?
Well, it's either a tale about a particular place that I'm really drawn to, but unconsciously I'm always drawn to the love stories. If they're anti-love stories or love stories, I do find that I do like writing those. So I like writing The Mermaid of Zena. I like writing The Spectral Bride and Tristan and Isolde, and there's often love stories in lots and lots of the folk tales. So for some reason, but then I like to write the romance in all my writing anyway, so as well as the place. But then on the other hand, I'm quite drawn to the sea stories as well. I've near a huge amount of the stories in Cornish Folk Tales of Place are coastal stories. And so I do like, I'm very drawn to the sea as a person, and I do like writing about the sea. And so I did really enjoy writing the story about the ghost at St Ives and the ship. And I do like to write the mermaid stories and about Maggie Figgy on the cliffs.
That was my chat with Anna Chorlton. A big thank you to Anna for taking the time to chat, and I definitely recommend checking out Cornish Folk Tales of Place, traditional stories from Mid and West Cornwall. And I've popped a link in the show notes to where you can get yourself a copy. That's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts about any of the stories or any of the topics that we chatted about, then do please feel free to get in touch. you can email me at thepiskytrap@gmail.com. Otherwise, that's it from me. I'll be back again soon with some ghost stories for the festive season. But in the meantime, take care and thanks for listening. The Pisky Trap is presented by me, Keith Wallace, with music by Elizabeth Westcott and artwork by Caris Harrington.